It was well past midnight. Most of the palace had gone quiet. The corridors were dim. The staff had disappeared into their quarters, and the enormous building seemed almost empty. Prince William had not expected to see anyone awake. He had been walking back from another late meeting when he noticed a thin line of light beneath the door of his father's private study. He stopped. Charles was still working. At least, that was what William assumed. He took a few steps closer. Then he heard a voice. Not his father's. An advisor. William hesitated. The door wasn't completely closed, and then he heard his own name. He stopped breathing for a moment. William cannot know yet. The words came quietly from inside the room. William stared at the door. He had heard enough to know that this wasn't an ordinary conversation. Then Charles answered, "I know." William's expression changed. What exactly did his father not want him to know? He moved closer and listened. "What are we going to tell him?" Inside the study, Charles stood beside his desk. Across from him was a senior advisor who had spent decades working around the crown. On the desk lay several documents. The advisor looked toward them. "If the decision is made tomorrow, Your Majesty, we will have to prepare William." Charles said nothing. The advisor continued. "He will ask why he wasn't told sooner." Charles slowly turned toward the window. "I know. And what will you tell him?" Charles remained silent. Then, quietly, that it was necessary. Outside the door, William's face tightened. Necessary? For what? He had spent his entire life preparing for the responsibilities that would eventually come with the crown. He had been trained to understand difficult decisions. He had been taught that the monarchy survived through preparation, discipline, and continuity. But now he was standing outside his father's study, hearing that a major decision was being made without him. The advisor lowered his voice. "There's another concern." Charles looked back. "What?" "If William discovers this from someone else." The advisor didn't finish. He didn't need to. Charles understood. William stepped backward. For a moment he considered walking away. Perhaps he shouldn't be listening. Perhaps there was an explanation. Perhaps his father had a perfectly reasonable reason for keeping something from him. But then Charles spoke again, and this time William heard something that made him stay. Once William knows, there will be no way of taking it back. William's eyes narrowed. He reached for the door and pushed it open. The conversation stopped instantly. Charles turned. The advisor froze. William stood in the doorway. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the only sound was the ticking of an old clock. William looked at his father, then at the documents on the desk, then back at Charles. "Sorry," William said quietly. Charles stared at him. William stepped into the room. "I didn't realize you were still awake." Charles's voice was calm. "You should be asleep." William almost smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. "So should you." Silence. The advisor looked uncomfortable. William noticed. "You can leave us." Charles immediately said, "William, no." William looked at the advisor. "Whatever this is, I think I've already heard enough to know that I should be part of the conversation." The advisor looked at Charles. Charles gave a small nod. The door closed behind him. Now there were only two people in the room. Father and son, king and future king, and neither seemed willing to speak first. "What are you not telling me?" William walked toward the desk. "What decision?" Charles looked down at the documents. "It's complicated." William gave a quiet laugh. "That's what you say when something is serious." Charles looked at him. "You weren't supposed to hear that conversation." "I know." William's voice remained controlled. "But I did." He waited. Charles said nothing. William looked toward the window. "You said they would have to prepare me." Charles finally answered, "Yes." "For what?" Another silence. William's patience began to disappear. "Dad." Charles looked at him. "What are you not telling me?" The question hung in the room. Charles walked slowly toward the fireplace. "There are certain decisions that cannot be made overnight." William followed him with his eyes. "And there are certain decisions that shouldn't be made without the person who will eventually have to carry them." Charles turned. "You think this is about you." William's expression hardened. "You just said my name." "I know. You said I couldn't know yet." "I said you couldn't know yet because the situation wasn't settled." William took a breath. So there is a situation. Charles looked away. That was enough. William understood. There is. Charles didn't answer. William stepped closer. What is it? Charles finally returned to the desk. He picked up one of the documents. This concerns the future structure of the monarchy. William stared at him. What does that mean? It means that some changes may have to be made. Changes to what? The way certain responsibilities are handled. William frowned. Which responsibilities? Charles hesitated. Then he said, Yours. William went completely still. My responsibilities? Yes. Why? Charles didn't immediately answer. William's voice became quieter. Why would you change my responsibilities without telling me? Because I was trying to protect you. William looked genuinely confused. From what? Charles lowered the document. From the weight of what comes next. William stared at his father. For years he had heard that phrase. The weight of the crown. The weight of duty. The weight of expectation. But hearing it now felt different. You think I can't handle it? No. Then what? Charles looked at him. I think you have been carrying too much already. That answer caught William off guard. He expected politics. He expected strategy. He expected some complicated constitutional explanation. He didn't expect concern. William looked down. You should have told me. Charles nodded. Perhaps. No. William looked back at him. Not perhaps. His voice was still quiet. You should have. The father and the son. Charles sat down. For the first time that night, he looked tired. Not like a king, like a father. You think I don't understand what this feels like? William didn't answer. Charles continued. I watched my own mother carry responsibilities most people could never understand. William looked toward the portrait hanging across the room. And you watched my mother. Charles went silent. William immediately regretted saying it, but the words had already left him. The atmosphere changed. Diana's memory had entered the room. Neither man wanted to say her name, but both were thinking it. William finally spoke. You know why I hate conversations like this? Charles looked at him. Why? Because everyone keeps telling me what I have to become. He paused. But nobody asks what it feels like to become it. Charles lowered his eyes. William continued. I'm expected to prepare for everything. The crown, the institution, the public, my family, every mistake, every headline, every crisis. He swallowed. And then, when something important happens, I'm told to wait outside. Charles looked wounded. That wasn't my intention, but that's what happened. Charles stood. I was trying to give you time. William frowned. Time for what? To be William. The answer silenced him. Charles continued. Before you become the person everyone expects you to be. William looked at his father for several seconds. Then he said, I don't know if I've had much choice in that. Charles nodded slowly. I know. William's anger began to fade, but the hurt remained. Then why didn't you tell me? Charles took a breath. Because I was afraid. William looked surprised. Of what? That you would do exactly what I did. What did you do? Charles looked toward the window. Put duty before everything else. William didn't respond. Charles continued. Your entire life has been shaped by the knowledge of what comes after me. He looked at his son. I wanted you to have something that belonged only to you. William's eyes softened, but he wasn't ready to forgive him. You don't get to decide that for me. Charles nodded. I know. William returned to the desk. He looked at the papers. So what exactly is this? Charles hesitated. William noticed. Dad. Charles finally handed him the document. William read the first page. His eyes moved slowly across the text. Then he looked up. This isn't about removing responsibilities. No, it's about changing how I carry them. Yes. William read another page. The proposal was designed to reduce the number of public obligations William would take on temporarily. It would give him more control over his private time, more protection for his family, more freedom to choose which responsibilities mattered most. William looked at Charles. You were trying to help. Charles nodded. I was trying to help without making you feel like you needed help. William gave a faint smile. That didn't work. No. For the first time that night, both men almost laughed. Almost. Then William's expression became serious again. You should have trusted me. Charles looked at him. I know. William put the papers down. There is something else. Charles waited. William asked, Were you planning to tell me tomorrow? Charles didn't answer. William stared at him. Dad. Yes. Then why tonight? Charles looked toward the clock. Because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. William frowned. What does that mean? Charles paused. Nothing dramatic. But William could hear something behind the words. You're avoiding the question. Charles sighed. I've learned something over the years. What? That waiting for the perfect moment usually means the moment never comes. William looked at his father. Charles continued, I didn't want another year to pass with both of us thinking we understood each other when we didn't. The words hit William harder than the secret itself. He looked down. Neither man spoke. William walked toward the window. The palace grounds were almost completely dark. He could see the faint lights in the distance. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like without all this? Charles looked at him. All the time. William turned. I thought you would say no. Charles smiled faintly. Kings are still people. William nodded. For a moment, there was no monarchy. No cameras. No advisors. No titles. Just a father and his son standing in a quiet room. William finally said, I don't want my children to grow up thinking duty means they can't talk to me. Charles's expression changed. You won't let that happen. I hope not. You will. William looked at him. How can you be so sure? Charles answered, Because you're already thinking about it. William picked up the documents again. You're still keeping one thing from me. Charles raised an eyebrow. What? The final decision. Charles was silent. William smiled slightly. You haven't made it yet. No. That's why the advisor said they would have to prepare me. Yes. William thought for a moment. Then he placed the papers back on the desk. Then don't make it without me. Charles studied his son. You're certain? William nodded. I don't need you to protect me from the future. He paused. I need you to prepare me for it. Charles looked down. Then he nodded. All right. William turned toward the door. He stopped. Dad? Charles looked up. William hesitated. Then quietly said, Thank you for finally telling me. Charles smiled. And William? Yes? You weren't supposed to hear any of that. William gave him the faintest smile. I know. He opened the door. Then Charles spoke again. I'm glad you did. William stopped. For a moment, neither man moved. Then William nodded and walked into the dark corridor. By morning, the palace looked exactly as it always did. Staff moved through the corridors. Cars arrived. Meetings began. The machinery of the monarchy continued. Nobody looking from the outside would have known that anything had happened. But William knew, and Charles knew, something between them had changed. The secret had not disappeared. The difficult decision had not disappeared. The future of the monarchy remained uncertain. But the silence between father and son had finally been broken. And perhaps that mattered more than either of them had expected. Because William would one day inherit the crown. But before that happened, he would inherit something else from his father. The understanding that sometimes the hardest part of duty isn't making the decision. It's finding someone you trust enough to make it with. And as William walked through the palace that morning, one thought stayed with him. The crown was waiting, but for the first time, he didn't feel as though he had to face it alone.